أهلا وسهلا بكم من جديد بعد هذا الفاصل القصير جدا. شكرا لمن عاد سريعا، وشكرا لمن انضم إلينا حديثا من أجل هذه الجلسة بعنوان تصور الحنين. كنا نتحدث قبل في هذا اليوم واليوم الذي قبله عن الحنين وكيف يمكن استخدامه بشكل إيجابي، كيف يمكن الاستفادة منه، كيف يمكن تعزيزه في المساحات، في الشعر، في الصور، في الموسيقى، في كل التفاصيل الصغيرة، كيف يمكن استخدام الحنين لصناعة محتوى ثقافي وتأصيل ذاكرتنا الثقافية بشكل أكبر. ما زلنا مستمرين في هذا الأمر، والحديث هذه المرة عن التصور أو تصور الحنين. كيف يمكن أن تستخدم أو يستخدم شعور الحنين من أجل إنجاح أمر بصري، فيلم، صورة، إعلان. كيف يمكن صناعة يعني انتشار وقبول من الناس بمجرد وضع هذا المكون فيه. وهذه الجلسة ثرية جدا بضيوفها وكلهم يتقاطعون مع هذا الأمر بشكل كبير جدا. دعوني أبدأ بالترحيب أولا بالمصمم الجرافيكي متعدد التخصصات والمدرس ورائد الأعمال الذي علم التصميم لأكثر من عقد من الزمان في مدرسة رود آيلاند للتصميم في الجامعة الأمريكية، وهو مؤسس ومدير استديو وبناء لفكرة بالشارقة الأستاذ سالم القاسمي. الفنان والرائد الثقافي والرجل الذي مولع بالسفر متعدد اللغات والمواهب، رحبوا معي بالأستاذ سفيان سمرابط. وتدير هذه الجلسة المصممة والمديرة الإبداعية في معهد مسك للفنون بخبرة تتعدى 10 سنوات في التصميم وتطوير المحتوى الإبداعي، الأستاذ مشاعل اليحيى. هذه الجلسة ستكون باللغة الإنجليزية، فآخر ما ستسمعون له باللغة العربية هو حديثي لكم الآن. اللي وده بجهاز الترجمة موجود، والبقية تستطيعون الاستمتاع بهذه الجلسة. مشاعل تفضلي.
شكرا لك محمد. I'm going to start by welcoming everybody. Thank you for joining us today and thank you for joining this session. Today we'll be talking about visualizing nostalgia, and we're going to look at and explore how nostalgia within the visual communication could actually bring and connect different, let's say, identities and cultures and unite them into one. And I like to start with Salim, if we can have this. All right, wonderful. And I would love to actually start, Sufyan, if you can let us know or let's say define nostalgia for us. Oh, you can just put it there.
Is it on? Yeah, hi. Good evening, Masal Khair. Thank you for being here. So the first thing, or أول شيء أحب أشارك معكم, is the definition of nostalgia. When we speak about nostalgia, it's very special or very sometimes difficult just to define clearly or shortly what nostalgia is. Is nostalgia a sound? Is nostalgia an image? Is nostalgia a taste? Nostalgia is more than something tangible. And I will mix actually English and Arabic. في فرق يعني بين النوستالجيا بالإنجليزي والحنين بالعربي. Nostalgia in English is often perceived as a suffering, as something hard, harsh, difficult. Whereas in Arabic, الحنين شيء حلو. It's something, an emotion we like to remember. And what we will try to see today with Salim is how nostalgia is an extraction. Nostalgia الحنين هو استخراج نفسي. How are we going just to base ourselves from different memories to create a nostalgia, a shared nostalgia, which is different elements which we are surrounded by to create something bigger.
So, go ahead. No, I was just going to kind of also respond to saying that within the region, you know, with the fast and speed of change, there are fleeting memories. And these memories, I'd love to have you, Sufyan, kind of pinpoint that. Sorry, Salim. I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, nostalgia is also very personal. So it's you know, you can see some of these images. I think this one is very specific. If you look at a cassette, you know, if you give this to or show this image to a 5-year-old, probably they would not have any relation to it. But as soon as we see it, you know, we can. There are these memories that we can build, and this is basically, you know, just you can rewind the cassette or fix the thing with it. And I think, you know, this is really important because nostalgia to me is the way that I understand nostalgia is very different than the way everyone is going to understand it. So I think it's really important to think about nostalgia from a personal perspective and a collective perspective. Yeah.
Wonderful. So I know that we spoke about this, and we spoke about how you guys come from multiple backgrounds, different backgrounds from the multiple regions, and within your experiences, you were you were immersed in multiple cultures, and would love to also look at your backgrounds and let us know more about where you guys come from experiences, environments, and so forth.
So actually, when we created this presentation with Salem, we wanted something interactive. We wanted something where we would share a part of us, so our own nostalgia, and how it's going to make sense for all of you here in this room. We all come from different backgrounds. We all come from different places. We all lived in different places, hence the map that you saw before. And we wanted also just to come back on the definition of Arab nostalgia. يعني الحنين العربي. Because we are in a time where very often the notion of being Arab is sometimes challenged. It's interesting to see that even though we have very different backgrounds, we share a lot of common things. So we decided just to come back on our condition, where we're from, where our family are from, to share that with you. So here, for example, you can see images from my family. I'm French Algerian. I was born, I grew up in France. And I'm actually the product of that. I'm the product of history. كتاريخ اوكي مولود بفرنسا اصلي جزائري وجزائري مش بس اصلي but I'm the product of a long historical process. So sorry, I'm just going to wake up just to show you a few things. So here, for example, you have some pictures of my young mother in Algeria, my father first time when he went in France, my grandparents in Algeria, where my grandmother used to own a hammam. And even though that's very long time ago, that's something which is still very inspiring me. And I think that for Salem, you will find exactly the same thing. Even though it was kilometers far away, you will see how everything is mixing.
Yeah, no, it's exactly the same thing. I mean, we have. I come from I'm from the United Arab Emirates. I grew up in the Emirat. I studied in the U.S. I worked in the U.K. for a little bit. I come from a Bedouin family. My grandfather was the ruler of Ras Al Khaimah, which is an emirate in the United Arab Emirates, and in the 1900s. And then my father was the chief of staff, Rais Al Arkan, and that's a picture of him in the bottom. This one, him and Sheikh Zayed. When my father was the chief of staff, he was. Actually, they were discussing the logo for the armed forces in the United Arab Emirates back then. So this was a really interesting, I think, finding that a picture that I found, because it's kind of related to me personally as a graphic designer, I think. But you'll see that this is our heritage. My mother is Bedouin. She doesn't speak any English, for instance. So I have a lot of my identity is also very different than my family's because I traveled around. I worked in different places. But this is something that that is ingrained in my identity. This is who I am. So I wanted to show that first, and we share a lot of these similar but different kind of history. Being Arab, but also the Arab identity is also very different and very diverse as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, hello? No, it's on. But definitely, and you guys come from. So you guys come from, as you mentioned and you explained, these diverse and how you guys had different pinpoints within your environments and when you're in your lifespan. And how do these images behind us reflect that? How did that really play a part in building your nostalgic memories from these imageries, whether they're, because we see images here of you guys when you're young, but also with food, in addition to patterns and furniture, and I guess symbolic sports figures.
As Salim was mentioning, a key point when we are visualizing our own nostalgia is actually visualizing your own identity. And even by creating such a presentation, you are doing a pure exercise of nostalgia. Because what is nostalgia? Nostalgia is a filter. We have thousands and thousands of memories that we keep, that we build with our families, with our friends. And then when it comes to nostalgia, you have to filter just to keep a part of these memories. So this is basically what we did here. And as an echo to the question I was asking, first of all, by wondering what is nostalgia, for me, nostalgia, my own personal nostalgia, was how to build an identity of a French Algerian or young Algerian guy in France. And it was mainly through food that I remember, because our food is very diverse, very rich. Specific ceremonies or rituals, moments together. So even the fact of being in the middle of France and having a majlis was something marking my nostalgia, but also my identity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think also, there are aspects of the identity of culture that is not necessarily visual. For example, poetry. My father is a poet, and I grew up with this kind of environment of reciting poetry, memorizing poetry, which I think is really, really interesting. But also, it's very difficult to kind of visualize. And I think, and you'll see how that kind of affected me as a designer as well. There are a lot of these moments. I think the slide before is more of our history, where we come from. But I think the slide shows a little bit more of what we grew up with, how we grew up, what kind of music we listened to. I mean, I have Mihat Hamad there, as an Emirati singer we used to still listen to. But these are some moments I think that are really interesting, and that kind of just visually, just looking at these things are just an indication of some of the visual elements that make up who we are today, in a way.
And because Salim and I, we then after lived in very different places from the places where we were born. I was born in France, then after, I came to Dubai, I was living in Spain, I was living in different places. I think that what you can see in these pictures is visually represented, but it should be represented by something else. Sometimes what I'm missing is food. So it's not the fact of Googling this food, which is going just to crave my nostalgia. So, for nostalgia, you can do a lot of things, because at the end, nostalgia is an emotion. So the same thing you can do for love, you'll do it out of nostalgia. And coming back to the Arab definition of nostalgia, عندنا العرب الحنين شيء which will heal which will heal you from a lot of things.
No, that's beautiful. And we had this conversation and you just mentioned it as well. Like the definition of nostalgia is a sentimental value. It's something that is positive. It's something that you want to go back to and touch again or feel or smell. And with that, I feel these here is where we've kind of brought in these collective, and not collective, but we came together. And this is what brought you guys together and what made you, it did brought you guys together because of the memories, because of the nostalgia. So I would love to tap into this slide. And I mean, I know that the majority of the audience here are actually smiling and they're referencing back to these. So I would love to hear this, your comment, or let's say commentate on how did these...
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, so I think when Sophia and we were talking, we were trying to, and preparing for this talk, we were thinking about, what is really nostalgia and looking at our experiences. And one of the things that was really interesting is how we connect, or how we connected, living in different places. And it's basically with TV. Back, when there was Orbit, when ART, and a lot of these channels, and Sufyan, you can talk about this a little bit more, but these are some of the elements that, we grew up with. And I think what happened during these times is that Arabs, a lot of Arabs from different places around the world were connecting indirectly through these narratives, through these things that they're watching or listening to, or I think it's yeah.
Again, I mean, resonating with what Salim was saying. Before the 90s or mid 90s, when you were a young Arab, you were mainly exposed to your own direct identity, which I mean that إذا كنت سعودي تفرج القناة السعودية، إذا كنت مصري تفرج القناة المصرية، جزائري القناة الجزائرية. الفضائيات, or like the satellite channels, brought something completely different to the table. We were, as people, كشعوب, able to discover each other's. And this helped us also just to build collective memories. Not individuals, that's something we will come back later, but let's say a pop culture, a common pop culture. So you have sub-regional, so for example here you have Khalti Gmasha, mainly for Khalij, but things like Majalat Majid was really pan-Arab. And it was not done in a political way, it was done in a cultural way, which is even more beautiful.
So how could nostalgia be a tool for current contemporary production based on these connections? So since we all share kind of some sort of a connection with these visual elements, how could we restore these elements within our culture, within the contemporary?
Yeah, I think, with these, again, right now we're looking at all these kind of communication methodologies or different platforms. It started to connect a lot of different people together, or started to kind of allow them to have a very similar experience. Although their individual experiences are also very different, their histories are very different. And I'm talking about Arabs in general that are, in different locations around the world. And I think what also started to happen right after that is, maybe we go to the next slide, is the internet. And this was the internet in the 90s started to bring a lot of people together in terms of communicating with one another. It was, when we're putting together this presentation, I started looking at a lot of these GIFs from the 90s, and it was also the time where we started to have these chatting platforms, whether it was ICQ or MSN Messenger or even FreeTel or Paltalk, whatever it is. There are so many of them. And we were connecting with one another, not just Arabs, but a lot of people from around the world, and sharing these visuals. And right now, when we're thinking about or looking at these GIFs, And I know Michal, you know, when we were looking at the GIF, you said, "Oh, remind me, like, this has a significance. Like, where was this?" And this was the time where, you know, this was, I can't remember, it was maybe 97, 98. It was around the first time that I designed or I built my first website. And I used that flame GIF a lot on my website, I remember. But a lot of these things, like a lot of these visuals, you know, for me, it means something very different than a lot of the people here, maybe. And I can relate to them in a very different way. But this was, we wanted to show this because this was kind of the first time we were able to communicate directly with one another around the world and kind of tell each other stories and start to create content and publish content.
Yeah. So, and you had a similar experience, like you started your forum, but you also created your website. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, actually the internet started to be a prolongation of myself because I was searching more and more about my own identity. I found a community and that helped me a lot through the Confused app.
Yeah.
And that inspired me a lot, not just to share my own experience, but also just to get the experience of a lot of people. And I figured out that we were several in the same case.
This was also, I mean, there's one thing I mentioned, like the first website I designed was not a forum. Later on, in around 2000s, I started, I created a website, and it was a blog where I would post a lot of the work that I was doing. And it was also, I had a forum, and that forum brought a lot of people. I had like thousands of people in my forum that would just talk about art and design and things like that. And to be honest, like back then, we didn't know what design was. Like, you know, we were just like these young kids who were just, you know, making stuff and posting it online. And that was a time actually where that was the time I was in university and studying design. But today, I think this kind of communication became a lot more sophisticated, a lot more refined, and they became these tools that not only allow us to communicate with one another, but it became very sophisticated publishing tools where we make stuff and we publish it, and became a place where we archive, we document and archive. And it's also you know, the time of in a way creating nostalgia, because these moments of documenting right now will eventually become an archive, and we'll always look back to it and say, oh, this, you know, what was happening during that time? How are we communicating with one another? What were the topics that were discussed? And I think this is really important that this is happening. And I don't know what social media is going to look like in the next few years, but I know that the internet became this space that facilitated communication, but it facilitated also the creation of content, of telling stories. And I think now individuals have the authority to tell their own stories in their own way. And I think that this is really, really important. And you know, as a designer, I think I'll talk about it from a personal perspective.
Yeah.
As a designer, today, when you look at my work, a lot of it is maybe, whether it was consciously or unconsciously, every work that I do, even as artists, you know, as artists or designers, every work that we do, we will always, there's always a personal element, and your experience is always reflected in your work, whether you realize it or not. And I think it's really important that individually we might not tell you know, a whole story of a whole culture, but collectively, our nostalgia collectively, our experiences collectively in the work that we do will paint a better picture of who we are as a culture, will paint a better picture of our identity. And it's always, you know, it's always important to never think of whether it was nostalgia or the work that we do or identity, never to think about it individually. Of course you can, but I think when you're thinking about it as a culture, it's always important to think about it collectively. You know, my work and Sufyan's work might be very different and might tell completely different stories, but collectively it draws a better understanding of our own cultures.
Yeah, that's definitely what what we agreed on and what we wanted to show is that nostalgia, for me, it's not just personal memories. It's something we agree as a group or as a society to remember and to celebrate. You were asking me, Masha'il, about how nostalgia is inspiring us in our work. For me, nostalgia, and I always compare it to oil. خصوصا يعني في منطقتنا يعني النفط او البترول شيء يعني ايجابي بس بنفس الوقت يعني ممكن يكون سلبي. So للحنين نفس الشيء. For nostalgia is the same thing. Nostalgia can be a malediction. If you keep just remembering the past without using it, we're not going to do anything. We will keep crying for Al-Andalus or for Andalusia, especially as Arab. But if you decide to really use this nostalgia as an inspiration, as a base for something stronger, we can do amazing things, especially نحن كعرب, as Arab. So even artistically, all my work is always inspired by that, about how nostalgia is something to be used for after. On the website or like on the platform Confused Arab, I always speak about the future of nostalgia. طيب عندنا الحنين, we have nostalgia, but what are we going to do with this? We need to use it to think differently about that. So here, for example, a few things I've worked on. So one of my first projects was Hammam Tomorrow, which was inspired by the hammam of my grandmother that I showed you before in Algeria. And exactly as Salim was saying, my personal art practice evolved in the same sense. I mean that I was really inspired by my personal memories or the memories of my family to go to something wider. The latest piece I did when I was in Al Ula was about Tagagat Al Ula. So me, born in Nantes, in the west of France, I manage now just to think about nostalgia in a different way.
Beautiful, and I want to also listen. Okay. I want to listen from your answer.
Yeah, and you'll see. I think. I mean, here's just like a collage of some of the work that we do, and I think it's really important that, and you know, based on my experience, my personal experience, and you know, my history, where I come from, my culture, my identity, is always reflected in my work, and I think it's really important as designers, as artists, that we always use our identity and allow it to be reflected in the work. Don't do it forcefully. Do it naturally. And you know, it's for me, I as a designer, I'm very. There was a challenge when I started my design career where, especially in the UAE or in the Gulf areas, there was a lot of multinational companies that were doing a lot of branding and graphic design, and so they didn't have the command for Arabic language. So it was a challenge, and I thought that it's really important that someone from the region who has an understanding of the Arabic language is able to design. So we started to design like bilingual identities, and we focused on Arabic typography and the Arabic script. And this is, you know, this is kind of reflected in the work that we do, and it's also because of who I am. And then we started to develop through Fikra, through my platform. We started to develop a lot of educational programs that focuses on design vis-a-vis culture, vis-a-vis identity. Like, who are we as how can graphic design specifically is used as a vehicle, as a vehicle in order to better understand our identity. How can we start to create more content and collaborate with other individuals from the region who are able to collectively draw a better understanding and tell our stories better? Because it's important that we now take command and be able to tell our own stories and our own narrative in the way that we want to tell it, that is true and honest to us.
That's absolutely beautiful, and it's a way of also reviving, right? The culture, when we were just saying, is that we're taking control, we're taking demand, and we're taking charge to really reflect visually with these new methodology or with these new communication methodologies.
Yeah, no, and I was going to say, like, I think it's also important to acknowledge that when we're talking about nostalgia, it doesn't mean that do things exactly the way that was done before.
Exactly.
It's important to think that, to think about the context in which you exist. It's important to think about the tools that you use. It's important to think about technological, advancements or even drawbacks that would dictate the way that you design or the way that you work. And I think it's very important to also, especially today, because of the ease of transportation and communication, everyone is inspired by everyone. The world is a very small space, very small place. And so it's important that we learn from each other. And it's important that we get inspired from different places around the world. But it's also important that we take these ideas and allow us to reflect our own identity through the work that we do.
Beautiful. I have many questions to ask you as well, but I want to open the floor to our audience because I do fear like we ran out of time. Mohammed here has been saying, stop it. So if we have any question, can we get the mic, please? I'll give you my mic.
Thank you so much for this wonderful display of many pathways and histories and personal histories. It's very generous, thank you. I'm Ahmed Hafiz, and my question is actually about the word nostalgia and identity, because yesterday we spoke a little bit around identity and when do we need to present or perform or bring our identity, and is it in situations of weakness, or is it when you are facing a larger power, or is it when you're in a space like in the US and you're trying to think what is an Arab in America and so on. So specifically nostalgia, because the word itself doesn't easily translate into Arabic. Haneen is longing or yearning, it's not nostalgia. Nostalgia, we always have to invent a word for it. Al-Haneen ila al-Madi, al-Ishtiyaq ila al-Madi. And that's something that interests me, words that cannot easily be translated. Does it mean that the trope or the sentiment is missing in that other language or in this other culture, or do we address it differently? And when we feel that we need to invoke that word and investigate its potential in a language that doesn't easily translate to it, when and why do we do this? So yeah, just to open up a bit on the term.
Thank you. Very interesting question, because that's discussable. When you're saying that nostalgia can't be exactly translated by Haneen, you are choosing exactly what kind of nostalgia can't be translated by Haneen. Because then after you were mentioning longing, I mean, I'm telling you that because that's a self-questioning that I had for a long time. So it means that even ourselves, we are being influenced by the way we are perceiving nostalgia, being positively or negatively. We tend to think in our world that nostalgia is very romanticized, and that's something I'm completely okay with. It was as well in the West, or in the history of the West. If you read Homer, with the Iliad, that was romanticized nostalgia. Nostalgia was seen in a more violent way when the end of the 19th century or early 20th century, when it was described as the longing of the soldiers, European soldiers, especially Swiss soldiers, coming back to their lands. So that's why, like when we started the conversation, I wanted just to kind of make a point of, as Arabs, we can also choose the way we want to write our own nostalgia, just to go a bit like on the sense of what Salim was saying. We are responsible to tell our own stories, and in this sense, I'm completely okay with the romanticized version of it, as long as it's not the end of something, but the beginning of something else.
And I think to build on that beautiful answer, Sufyan, I think also to build on that is that I don't think that we should allow ourselves to be constrained by the definition of nostalgia as the way that it's defined. I think it's okay to kind of allow the definition to kind of expand and really, you know, like have it be kind of ambiguous in a sense, because I think nostalgia is you know, in a way is very nostalgia and identity together, and nostalgia separately and identity separately as well, is that I think that they are very different to very different people, and you know, it's very, very personal. So I think what I have defined as nostalgia to me is completely different to you. And I think when we translate it and being bilingual, when I say Haneen, that maybe is what I think about nostalgia as a word specifically. But I also think that, you know, Haneen is not what nostalgia is. It's a, you know, and because language also brings with it its own connotations, its own histories, its own all of these different things. So right now we're having the conversation in English, so when we're saying nostalgia, it has these kind of Western connotations to it. So I think it's important to also think about nostalgia as a word from like, you know, from a much more ambiguous perspective.
And on that note, I thank you, Salim and Sufyan.
Thank you so
much. If anyone would like to ask any questions, you guys will be around with us, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here and for listening.
Thank you, everyone.